Hello, and welcome to the CFA Society San Francisco podcast, where we interview and discuss current topics with leading members of the Bay Area investment community. This week, Tanya Subatang, Membership Manager with CFA Society San Francisco, sits down with Sanem Alkan, Senior Advisor with St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Listen in as they discuss career growth and insights into working with nonprofits.
Good morning, Sanem. Thank you so much for getting up so early in the morning to chat with me. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd love to get started by having you share your career journey, because it's a really interesting one, and how you ultimately came from working in a very traditional finance and industry background and now working for St. Jude, which happens to be actually one of the top nonprofits. So I want our listeners to kind of understand how you came from that traditional beginning to where you are now.
Great question. And one I have to start by with an answer that gives you a little bit of context into my personal upbringing. I ended up with a doctor, surgeon couple parents in Turkey as a teenager. They were very educated, but also full of life, social and philanthropic people. And every facet of my life, they really encouraged me to think big and get involved with a lot of different activities and opportunities. I was also very fortunate to have the path that I had in education. I ended up at a very interesting school in Istanbul, Turkey, where I grew up. One of the best high schools probably in Europe, merit-based, and all AP level classes through high school. That really opened my eyes up. It was an American school for Turkish kids. And, I ended up going through that 7-year program and just really getting out thinking I could do really well if I tried different paths. It doesn't have to be just Turkey. I applied to schools in the United States and ended up a little bit too late in the application cycle. I didn't really think that I would actually get to the US. My parents were a little bit more protective, conservative than an average parent. By the time I applied, it was like February 20, something like that. And the only application deadline was UT Austin. I'm giving you that quick, funny story, but UT Austin turned out to be an amazing school to go to for a person like me, coming from a tiny high school, 50,000 students in college. A big jump. You really have to kind of reflect on your journey and say, how am I going to succeed in this big world all by myself, by the way, right? I didn't have any parents or any close friends nearby. So that really became an amazing catalyst to think big, kind of carved a path for myself that really became a little bit different than what I was growing up with. From that point on, I started thinking even bigger. I really wanted to get back to New York and do something in a more traditional environment, which was similar to where I grew up. And I said, finance, I should really get into, and I had studied risk management, insurance, and I said, there might be interesting roles in New York for this. And I did get into the top company in the space, Marsh McLennan. They advise all these corporate companies, corporations like Coca-Cola. And I had an amazing opportunity advising the CFOs of those companies, the Coca-Colas of the world, with a small team. I mean, it's an amazing exposure. You learn a lot about those types of businesses and also, different cultures. It's a global role. But you don't quite make money. So it took me almost no time to make the call to really try to find a way to make a better living in New York City. I mean, in 2 years, you learn something about business, but not so much. And most business schools and people don't quite encourage you to go to business school that quickly, right? They want you to have experience. But in my case, I had some personal experience. I, had seen this global risk management world. So I felt confident enough to make the jump. And I applied to NYU, actually no other school, because I really didn't want to go anywhere other than, where I was living. I was in Seoul at the time, close to NYU. I could bike to NYU. And NYU actually is, one of the top places if you want to go work on Wall Street. It is right on Wall Street. So I had that whole goal in the back of my mind. I actually, fortunately, also got a fellowship from NYU. So that just kind of sealed the deal. And of course, when I got to NYU, my only goal was to get that big summer internship to be able to get on Wall Street. And I was, again, extremely fortunate. I guess everything aligns when you really wish big and really try and become persistent. I ended up in a 10-people program at Salomon Brothers at the time, which was about to merge with Smith Barney, it turns out, when I was in school. And then over time, by the time I was graduating with Citibank, as you know, it now became all Citibank. But Salomon Brothers was a very tough program to get into for institutional sales sales and trading. And I did get that internship, and it was really fun to see and also sit in the middle of super bright group of people moving a lot of money and doing a lot of very cool things, right? Institutional sales and trading. But it also gave me an opportunity to see how narrow some of the job functions are. You're only selling municipal bonds or trading that, right? You know, it's kind of, I mean, for my personality, you know, I'm now trying to go big and do different things. There was a bit of a mismatch. And I realized there's another world in finance and money management, which is high wealth. And so I ended up really redirecting myself in my second year to jobs where I would take care of, I would get into that path. And I did actually work really, really hard to get the job. And I ended up at Goldman Sachs, which is one of the better firms in the space, ultra high wealth, 6-month training program at the time. It's changed a little bit now, but wonderful, wonderful way to see finance. You are the firm's salesperson and you have access to every single product, and you do cover a particular territory, but it could be flexible. So I ended up in Texas, covering Colorado and Texas. The only glitch, I had a boyfriend at the time in New York, so the triangle for travel became really difficult. So it was a very personal decision after 2+ years of doing this. I said, I probably need to be back in New York, working in any other part of finance or wealth management still. Goldman had just gone for an IPO. I'm telling you a funky story, but it really kind of is life, right? You can plan all you want, but along the way, life will also throw curveballs. And in this case, Goldman had just gone for an IPO. Market was kind of shaky. And my manager said, lots of changes. Why don't you also explore other departments within Goldman or other regions? And I was like, as I did that, I started meeting all kinds of ex-Goldman, professionals. One of them had set up what was called a fund of hedge funds, and I had no idea what that was about. Now, I'm dating myself, obviously, but this was early 2000s. And I said, that's interesting. I would love to learn more about that. So being kind of flexible and adaptable helped me at that point, right? It's not just through school and life. You kind of have to have that cap on in your career too, to some extent. So I ended up following that path into a small family office that was setting up a fund of hedge funds. And I learned how to invest. I learned how to think creatively about marketing that fund of funds. So I became kind of like an operating partner of that fund of funds. After a year of doing that, I realized I love the path. I love hedge funds. It's basically, just to put it into context, institutional investments, you are given a very narrow book, either to trade or sell. You go to high wealth management. You are maybe in a very narrow territory, but you do have very boutique-y, interesting niche products. And you could kind of become a bigger business owner. You kind of have to learn everything about the money management side. But when you get to the hedge fund world, you end up really becoming a business owner in some way, right? You are learning a lot about very, very niche products, and not just high wealth products, but like one hedge fund or 3 unique investment opportunities. So you go deeper and deeper, but the world is wide open. You can work with some of the highest wealth, most unique investors out there, institutional too. So I really enjoy that path of getting to know a product very well, but also thinking big about how it could be broadly marketed. From there, I wanted to get into a more institutional path in hedge funds and worked with J.H. Whitney. It's the oldest private equity firm in the U.S. And they had been investing in what's called growth equity. They were just trying to put businesses on a path of high, fast growth after they generate revenue. So, hedge funds were an interesting match for them. They were just putting these hedge funds in place with their personal money as general partners of the firm. And I became an operating partner on the hedge fund side, doing everything, jack of all trades, basically. That really became a very interesting path in itself, because I remember one of the recommendations that my mentor and boss at the time had for me was, don't come into my office unless you have something really big to resolve. I really am relying on you to kind of think about growth paths and, troubleshooting, but I really just don't have too much time for this. So
wow, very candid.
It's interesting. Exactly. But I mean, I actually almost love that advice, because for somebody like me who is not, I'm okay with micromanagement, but I really don't need it. And I can do a lot on my own. What a great match, actually, in terms of personality and career advice. And I said, thank you for trusting me. I'm just going to go for it. And, here I am, like, figuring out, how do I grow this business? How do I brand it? What are the operational issues? So again, it became a little bit long a story, but these are very important learnings, because had I not gone through that learning path of, one, being flexible, and two, not being micromanaged, but having to think on my feet and kind of adapting to flows and issues, I don't think I would have gotten to this point. So back to your original question, took a little bit long, but I ended up working with some families long enough, putting them either in business and as investment managers or helping them invest. Then I sat back and I said, when I came to California, there are other ways one could make investments in finance, and I'd like to see those. So, for example, philanthropy or social impact. You don't quite make as much social impact in hedge funds. You can, but it's maybe several steps removed. So I really wanted to make that jump into the last frontier for me in finance, which was philanthropy and social impact. And that's how I ended up with St. Jude. But after quite a few years of setting up hedge funds and really working with private equity-esque money manager families. So yeah, that's really where I am today.
Well, it's a very robust journey for sure. And, having hear you tell exactly how you got to that point, and it seems very strategic. And I'm sure when you're in the middle of it, or maybe you thought of it, that it was a very strategic move, because you learn all these vast experience. So was it your ultimate goal when you were going through these like job movements to move into the nonprofit sector? Maybe not specifically St. Jude, but, mentioning the philanthropy. Was that always the goal, you think?
No, not really. Actually, that is such a great question. I always had a, 1 to 5 year or 3 to 5 year type of a goal mapping process in my mind. I really always knew I wanted to get to certain places. But philanthropy was really just a bit opportunistic, and also a follow-up on everything I've done. Mm-hmm. I mentioned to you, my family has always, they're doctors, and they helped freely their patients and, related families with in-kind support, and not just financial. Lots and lots of philanthropic work they did over the years. I grew up with that. And I fortunately saw a lot of people throughout my career help, the less privileged, and, in so many ways. I did work as a volunteer with Juilliard School in NYU, especially Juilliard, where 90% of students are on scholarship, and it's not, it's a great cause. It's one of the top conservatories for music and dance and drama in the world. And I was a volunteer there, so I did see the operating side of philanthropy and social impact there. To some extent, but I wasn't in a seat like I was in the hedge fund world, where I had to think through how to develop the brand and really go execute it. I was just an advisor. Mm-hmm. So when it came to a point where I was reimagining the rest of my path in California, which is a very philanthropic place, lots of very interesting opportunities here for that, I started thinking maybe this is a perfect catalyst. I know a lot about building businesses and working with money people, and I really like investing and helping people invest. But how can I channel that energy and know-how to a space where, one, I don't have too much experience, but I can see I can make impact. And two, where I think people like me could really be beneficial. Because I'm an outsider, I'm not thinking like them. So maybe reimagining a process or bringing a fresh perspective, from a donor or myself could be beneficial. And it's honestly, now that I think about it, in the last 5 years of being in the space in an operating role, I see how much I have been able to contribute in different ways. It's not just about, hey, here's a fundraising, strategy. Right. It's really about how do you even brand differently in a brand new market? How do you really think about the operating side of things? Like not only just getting the message across, but once the money comes in, how do you actually account for it? All of those things, it could be very different when a finance person thinks about it as opposed to a nonprofit person thinking about it.
Oh, that's such a fascinating point of view. I've never thought of that. Which brings me to my next question: is having been worked in these different types of sector, private, traditional finance and investment to straight nonprofit, what were some of the differences have you kind of seen through your experience, and what did you do to adapt to them?
That's an amazing question. Actually, I really never assumed going into nonprofits would be an easy path and also a hospital setting. Keep in mind, St. Jude is a hospital at the end, or in the end, focused on rare children's diseases. And, my parents had been in that space. That's, obviously one of the connections there. I really knew what the hospital world was like. And I had also seen education, which is Juilliard and others. They're very traditional, very different conservative settings. Nothing moves so fast. And I knew coming from the hedge fund world, I would see a little bit of a slowdown. I think that's where, I would say I ran into an interesting observation. The speed with which things moves. It's so much slower, and the processes they involve so many more people, so many more layers. Coming from an entrepreneurial, fast-paced setting to a kind of a slow-moving, more bureaucratic organization environment, it's just such a shock to your system if you don't have that kind of upbringing. So that for me was the biggest adjustment, I would say, or the biggest observation. And yes, being flexible and adaptable, 100%. You have to have those types of skill sets. You have to be resilient, because not everything you say may be taken the same way. Then you have to educate. Then you have to actually take your time, be patient. If somebody has that fast-paced, I'm going to get everything done yesterday type of a mentality, they may not quite last in this type of a setup. So I knew I had to adapt. And honestly, that was one of the challenges that I really wanted to take on. I really wanted to learn. So, because, I've always been in a very fast-paced set. But yeah, once you're there, you realize how fast you have to adapt.
I'm sure that was a major 180 for you. Again, going to what you said is a very high, everybody kind of, people think of Wolf of Wall Street, those kind of movies where it's fast paced, and then you move into the sector, as you said, St. Jude's been around for quite some time. So I think last time we talked, you said it has history there,
Very, very important point. And honestly, so that's another thing. You're as an entrepreneur, setting up hedge funds, you're starting from scratch. You are creating a brand, and you're really building a following, from scratch. Well, St. Jude has been around for 60 years. In fact, Danny Thomas, the founder, started out as an entrepreneur, creating a following, $1 from every American. So their culture is very much, go methodically, build a brand. And they've been doing it for 60 years. There is a set process for marketing, for operations, for technology. Everything is kind of well established. So trying to take that model and enter a new market or a new audience segment, which is what I was hoping to do with the very ultra high wealth or foundations. I mean, there has been a ton of work in that area, but go much deeper, and especially on the West Coast in Northern California. Those are types of business entry strategies and execution strategies that the firm wasn't quite used to. So it's interesting bringing an external perspective, saying, I really know what I'm doing. Can we try this? And have people say, oh, we're not so sure. Let's just evaluate. And then that takes quite a bit of time to go through, and you educate both sides, or both sides educate each other. You get to know some people better, then you understand how you can actually make bigger impact. That process is a big dance. Yeah, absolutely. You are so right about that whole process being a bit of a shock for me.
Do you feel that working for a company like St. Jude, and I'm sure any other nonprofit, really, there's more of an emotional connection or the need to be more empathetic to the cause in order to be successful in the role? Or do you think that is, that's just, it's not there?
Oh, that's such a great question. I was a little bit focused coming into the philanthropy space, much like I went to certain schools and, certain career paths. I really just didn't look at too many other opportunities. The minute St. Jude popped up, I said, aha, I love children. I have so much affinity for medicine, global medicine, and doing it at a low cost. And I have so much affinity for education, which St. Jude is a massive educator. I mean, they have a whole partnership with the World Health Organization now to export their standard of care through education. So I just thought that was a trifecta. You know, everything that I had grown up with, that I enjoyed, I really could pour my passion into, a new path like this at a firm that is very established, top of its game, and it would be a learning experience for both. And it has been. So that part, I think, is a must. You have to kind of nail the passion part. You know, you have to have passion for something, right? And if it's the company or the direction, you'll shine anyway. But I do think team matters. So you have to work with the people, with people that you really enjoy working with. And I'm blessed that I have an amazing team right, in my vicinity. So, I bridged that gap over time. It didn't happen on day one. I really had to kind of find my people at the firm. I'll position it that way. I really had to kind of navigate my way and say, I really enjoy working with these people. I'm going to win them over and they're going to win me over. And, we're going to be real partners. So today we have a real ecosystem within the firm, very innovative, very agile thinking. Great group of people. It wasn't always the case on day one. And so, you have to be patient with that. Just build your own kind of ecosystem and network within. But yeah, that's actually a great question. I honestly think you should have a little bit of passion for the cause or the firm or whatever you're going to work with. I mean, I couldn't have sold a single hedge fund had I not been passionate for it, or about it. I couldn't have really talked about rare children's diseases to this extent had I not believed that we were doing something good. So, I mean, that I think, or maybe it's just me, I believe that that really helped.
So I want to ask a hypothetical questions, like in an alternative universe. If you were to go back to, say, the traditional, investment and finance sector, okay, what would you say is one thing you would take away having worked in nonprofit that will make you a better employee now transitioning back into a for-profit?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually think every experience counts. And I'm so glad I got to see this world. I'll give you many examples about, the types of people I'm meeting just to even talk about potential donations or fundraising. There are many venture capitalists and all kinds of alternative investors who are now thinking about incorporating social impact and philanthropy into their core business. Because one, it's a great way to get involved much earlier than, your institutional dollars may allow. And two, it just gives you a different perspective. You kind of, understand, a company, like ESG is huge now, as you know, right?
Absolutely.
You understand the dynamics of an investment you're about to make. So I actually think, packaging all this and going back to a for-profit world is even more, impactful because you kind of think through all of those ESG, opportunities and risks in a very dynamic way. From that standpoint, absolutely. Second one would be, just being able to process different size firms and teams or different cultures and coming with that experience back to finance, I think could be a very powerful thing. I do keep a leg in the for-profit world, just by advising certain families, or businesses. I've always done that. I kind of toggle between the two. I think maybe that's another interesting point about me. I've never been a single path, single direction, type of a person. I've always kind of diversified. I did actually sit on Juilliard's junior board while I was in the for-profit world and vice versa. Right now, I still help for-profit companies think through their businesses as an advisor. So I do love that ability to toggle back and forth. And I do recommend that to a lot of people because it gives you different perspectives. I think that's what I would say.
So when people hear nonprofit, immediately they think less pay, probably menial pay. And even though they have a passion for something like you mentioned, being with the family, the doctors, so you do have an innate passion for healthcare. What would you say or what advice would you give someone who might be thinking, we were similar shoes with you maybe a couple of years ago. That's like, I have a passion for some music or passion for whatever have you. They want to work in that nonprofit sector, but they're afraid to make that leap because whether they're, moving up in their career, they're super successful in where they're currently at, but maybe they'll not have the passion. What kind of advice would you give someone?
It's an important point. I mean, I must say it has been very disappointing to see so many jobs not pay so well or be very difficult from a lifestyle perspective in an operating role. So philanthropy isn't for everybody. You not only have to have that passion, but you're going to sometimes work a lot for a lot less pay. So, as a young person wanting to get involved, I would say maybe my path is an interesting one to copy, right? I really had to make a living. I didn't have too much support. I had to kind of make a living in a city like New York City, right? It
not alone is hard.
Exactly. So, but on the flip side, I had Juilliard in my backyard, and I basically could kind of duplicate what I was doing in my for-profit world there by creating a new brand for them, for younger professionals, in their audience. They had people in their 90s in their audience, and they wanted to go younger and younger. And so I became that advisory group member. Actually, I co-led the group to be able to kind of bring my know-how from the for-profit world and help them with branding and building out an actual strategy and go execute. I wasn't in the operating role, and I certainly wasn't getting paid for it, but it gave me so much pleasure and so much satisfaction to be able to transfer my skills that way temporarily. And then that led me to all these other nonprofit opportunities. Obviously I could talk about it. When I wanted to actually go work for a nonprofit, I could actually point to what I had done as a volunteer. And I had several of those under my belt by the time I went. So that I would recommend highly. That strategy is not a bad one. Just dip your toes in, get to know people, help them. There is satisfaction in that. It may not be a lot of money. It may just be an advisory role, but you do actually see close up what a nonprofit is like.
So you mentioned Juilliard a couple of times. I love Juilliard. I am a very failed pianist, unfortunately. My mom has tried. I took lessons and I just couldn't get it, unfortunately for me. But why Juilliard? I'm curious because it is a very prestigious school. And obviously, I think it's very much well known. How did you get into being an advisory board for Juilliard?
This is one of the gems of the world. I mean, first of all, very small school, not too many students, not too many people really go attend events. But it was just a chance, coincidence. One of my friends basically said, I've been involved with Juilliard for a while, and they're looking to really boost their presence in the young professional space. And, at the time I was in my 20s and, perfect match in terms of wanting to get involved with a place and them having an opportunity for something like someone like me. And so I went to them. Actually, there were a couple other people similar to me, and I said, well, I'd love to be able to set up something formal so that we can kind of create more momentum. And my co-lead of this effort was very similar to me in the finance world, and he really just wanted to do something very similar. And we were very different in terms of upbringing and approaches, but we were very complementary. And so we collaborated quite a bit to get that going. Honestly, Juilliard is a gem because you get to see behind the scenes, what's going on at the school once you're an advisor. And they do extend, through our little group, we extended that privilege to whoever became a member. So we had an amazing following. People loved attending the events and going behind the scenes, seeing a class, for example, attending a class and then talking to students. And to me, back to your question about why Juilliard, I mean, I've always been a big fan of music. I actually, to the point of having a music technology company myself, I did as a side project have a startup in the space. So I really have always been a big fan of music, but I really just think that youth education, no matter what type of education, was such a critical cause for me that I thought this is wonderful. And again, it kind of brings together everything I enjoy.
I love how throughout your career, you really went after what you were passionate about. Like, Juilliard, you were passionate about music. So let me do something in this space. And I think it's a great reminder for everybody that if you're passionate about something, go for it. Find that space. And to your point, whether it's just a volunteer opportunity. I want to kind of take it back in the beginning, having grown up in Istanbul and then coming into to the US for college. What was the biggest eye-opening experience coming completely? I mean, you did grow up, you said, in an American school, but I'm sure still culturally speaking, it was a big shock going to Texas.
It totally was.
What was like the one big eye-opening experience you had? And what was something that if you can go back to younger Sanem and say, whatever you want to say when she's first arrived, what would you say to her?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think, I don't think I was always so confident. And any opportunity to build your confidence is a very important one. You should just seize the moment and go for it. I wasn't always that much of a risk taker.
I can't tell.
Well, I mean, one thing you could actually, a tidbit here quickly, you also don't have to be the CEO or the first person in line in the risk-taking, pyramid. You could be the second in line and still be a big risk taker. It's just, you don't have to sign all the documents or take all the right, official risks. So I kind of adapted to that too. But look, I mean, I grew up in a somewhat conservative setting and then ended up at UT. You said, it's a culture shock in itself, going from another country to Texas, but also a big school. And I had plenty of opportunities to test my skills and become more confident. And I think ultimately, whenever I learned something, it was because I took that extra risk. And I failed several times too. It wasn't like a glorious path, but I would say if I turned around and tried to mentor somebody, I would say do actually experiment, because 9 out of 10 you will probably fail. I mean, that's the startup success rate, right? In your life too, you will probably fail at a lot of things. But the one time that you succeed will be so worthwhile, and also the disappointments will be worthwhile too, right? You learn from them, you reflect on them. Building that resilience is important. And I'm so glad that I kind of weathered the storm and fought with myself and the world to some extent to be able to kind of take those challenges on. I think building that confidence in hindsight was really worth it. And then it just becomes so much easier throughout in the second part of your career, right? You can actually take moments, take a breath and say, okay, now I know I can get into this new area not because I know I'm going to nail it immediately, but because I have some skills to be able to adapt. So yeah, it's a very interesting question you asked. I mean, I think it doesn't come naturally. I think some people are born with a lot of confidence. I meet them all the time. I just wasn't one of them. So, I really had to reflect and really learn from my mistakes and my successes and say, this is where I'm going to be better. But to close the loop, I had no problems as a result being the second in line and the operating partner, as opposed to the one that signs all the checks or comes up with the strategy, right? I would be the quarterback. And that's a great role. You're still taking a lot of risks and you're executing.
That is a great analogy. You can be the quarterback, and that's okay. That's right.
Yeah, totally fine.
I know you're probably so busy today, so I want to wrap this up, but I have a couple more questions that I'm dying to ask you. One of them being, we already know that there's a unbalance when it comes to female in the industry. What advice would you give someone who may be a high school student going into college, trying to decide her career path? What advice would you give them if they were interested in going into a very daunting industry as in investment and finance?
Yeah, I mean, and also keep in mind hedge funds, even more female unfriendly, I should say. Well, luckily now a lot of industries have a lot more support. I mean, I got involved with 100 women in hedge funds at the time, now 100 women in finance for that reason. I basically migrated to settings where I could find mentors and a little bit of resource, a network, something like that. And I would recommend taking advantage of any kind of support network. And sometimes it's men, actually. It doesn't have to be all women. But there are some amazing men in every industry. And, investment management has quite a few of them. In fact, CFA Society has quite a few of them. So those types of societies and networks are amazing to be part of, to be members of. So I would recommend that path. Among everything. And honestly, it doesn't have to be a female mentor. Lots of men grow up with very successful women as moms and wives. and they really want women to do better. It's just, I think the structure sometimes of these firms are not lending themselves to a very female friendly environment, because it's very fast paced, and how can you possibly have a big family and balance work at the same time? So I get all that. And the industry is working really hard to fix all that. But again, maybe become a more active member of a group like 100 Women in Finance, or, CFA Society's Women Network. Every group now has one. So yeah, I think that's a great question you're asking. It's something I think is in progress for the industry.
I love it. And another question I wanted to ask you is, what's next for you? What do you, and you said earlier, you think within a 3 to 5 year time frame. What's next for you, Sanem? What is the next big thing you want to do?
I've really enjoyed setting up businesses throughout my career. I've really enjoyed advising in a strategic and operating role, all sorts of impact people, impact investors, impact, thinkers. And I really love being a quarterback, and I love philanthropy. I do love social impact a little bit more, broadly. Doesn't have to be just free money. It could be, money with a bit of a return. So I could totally see, again, a confluence of all these factors and a lot of my skills coming together. I could continue on this path. I have zero problems. In fact, it is a lifelong journey. What I picked, I think the way I've kind of nurtured my career, it is not something I need to walk away from. It's very manageable and it's actually very rewarding. So, I think, I'm helping a ton of different families indirectly. Why not maybe go in house with one and dedicate my, whole time to one or several? All of that is completely feasible. Either staying on the for-profit side or nonprofit side, or going to the for-profit side. But I really do think that being an operating partner, either in an execution role, in-house role, or as an advisor, is just a natural step from here. I'm already doing it in different ways. Why not just go deeper and deeper?
Sure. That's true. And my final question for this morning, and I ask this to everybody, who inspires you and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's a loaded one. I have so many people who inspire me, but let me think. So I think there is one person that I would call out, and he's just been a great friend over the years too. One of my former bosses, actually. I mentioned I worked with J.H. Whitney. One of the fund managers there I worked with extremely closely. He was what I would describe a typical Renaissance man, just touches a lot of different things and is good at all of them. Just a great personality. Everybody wants to take him to a bar and talk to him for hours. One of those guys. But he was a classical languages PhD student at Harvard when he decided to quit and go travel the world. And the minute he did that, went to Asia. He ended up in countries like Bhutan and, really exploring. He became an expert chef. He then said, I can actually do well in finance. Why don't I touch, investments? And he became a top auto stock analyst in Asia and Japan. Got him hired. That got him hired into Tiger. He ended up he was the last managing director of Tiger in Japan. Then Whitney hired him to build out a hedge fund platform. I collaborated with him. We raised billions. But guess what? He still had a kid in the middle of launching all those funds. And I literally said, how could you do that? Like, that is incredible. You are so busy and you have, you're building a brand new business from ground up and you have a kid, balancing the two. He said, honestly, she gives me perspective. And so I asked him, what would you want her to learn? Because it's a she also, right? He's coming from a very masculine male industry. At the time, Japan was even more masculine than it is today. And this was around, again, the 2000s, early 2000s. And he said, he thought for a minute and he said, confidence. I'd love to instill confidence in her. And that would be my only, value add. And I can tell you that girl is amazing. They have a great relationship and she really is an independent human. And I haven't seen her in the last few years, but as a kid, she was amazing. So, I think that stuck with me. Just, and again, back to our earlier point about learning to be confident. Either you grow up with it, somebody instills that in you on day one, or you learn through experiences. And I think, that has always inspired me. How can I become more and more confident in what I do and just add value.
Oh, I love that. I think that's a major plot twist for me, because when you mentioned that he was a male, he was doing all of this, but it was his daughter that gave him perspective. That's a beautiful thing. Well, Sanem, thank you. I could probably talk with you for more and hours and hours, but I know you have a busy day ahead of you. So I wanted to thank you again for joining me on this podcast. And I really look forward to hopefully catching up with you in the future.
That would be great. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear my story.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the CFA Society San Francisco podcast. We hope you enjoyed the engaging discussion. Please stay tuned for more episodes of this podcast featured every fourth Tuesday in our weekly newsletters and through the CFA Society San Francisco podcast channel, available through most major podcast apps.